welcome you all to Trek Wars. So we'll keep it real simple. So today we're going to be talking about the research vessel, the Oberth class, the gunboat, and the light corvette. And we're going to do a comparative analysis looking at their shields, their weapons powers, their capabilities, and we'll get a better understanding why the Federation would build this ship. Now, first off, I want to point out the fact that the ship, by most 24th century standards, is extremely small. But in the 23rd century, this ship really isn't that small compared to ships that existed out there in its comparisons. You got to think about, we're talking about the Constitution Rift, the Constellation. Now, Excelsiors did exist during this time period, but they were very rare and few between. So this ship is pretty much the size of a bird of prey. It's 150 meters, and your standard warship by the Federation standards is around 300 meters. So it's really only half the size of a standard warship. So one of the things that I want to do is obviously take a look at the Constitution class. And the Constitution class is a ship most people are very familiar with. We'll look at its stats, and it's going to give you a generalization of what most Federation starships are like during this time period. Now, the reason we're using the Constitution class, that's a ship that you guys all know, but one of the things that's really common during the 23rd century is they're using the same parts for just about every ship. As this analysis goes on, we get further into the 23rd century ships, you'll notice a very similar pattern. Basically, almost every ship is almost identical. It's got really similar, shields. It's got really similar weapon payloads. Their sensors are very similar. There are variations between each ship, but they're very slight for the most part. And so we're going to kind of talk about that so we can have a better understanding of where the Oberth stands and what makes it unique amongst a lot of its peers. All right, so let's look at our Constitution class before we move on, and let's take a look at its warp speed. So the optimal speed is warp 4, the max safe cruising is warp 6, and the emergency speed is warp 8. Those are really the only three that we're going to really pay attention to. We're not going to worry about the absolute max speed, and we're not going to pay attention to destructive speed. All right, so next thing, we have the kind of nacelles that are being used. We have the engine output, and then we have the warp power index is what I want you guys to pay real close attention to. So it's 1.0. All right, and so we'll just kind of look at the weapon power. So we'll see the really thing is the output is 5.0 times 10 to the 11th. It has a fire rate of 30. We have a phaser power index of 1.0. So how this is going to work is that's how fast it can charge up those phasers, and then obviously the output is how much. And if you guys are curious, obviously rate of fire, so 30 ppm means these ships are shooting 30 times per payload. Okay, so we'll just kind of talk. So we know that we have warp 4, warp 5, warp 7.3. So you can see there's a decrease in efficiency. You can see that it has only one phaser bank. It's using the same firepower, it's using the same PPMs. Now, one of the things that we wanted to kind of pay attention to is sensor index values. So planetary survey 0.7, 0.5, 1.8, 1.3, and 1.3. So basically, all the Constitution classes stats all the way around are 1.0 for all its sensors. So you can see when it comes to short range, long range, and navigation, it's better. But specials, planetary survey, stellar survey, they're less. And it's obviously because the navigation of the deflector is half the size and the power requirements aren't there. So I'll make it real simple. So this ship has a warp index of 0.79. Obviously, the Constellation has a warp power index of 1.0. We also saw there's a difference between the sensors. And obviously, so the optimal speed is warp 4. That's the same. So max safe cruising, we got warp 6. This is warp 5. It's just one behind. So basically, because of the smaller engines, the smaller output, the smaller reactor, the smaller warp core, it's only able to do, it's one warp speed below, which is pretty significant, but it's not the end of the world. So overall, the ship is, it's not underpowered. I don't want to say that, but it's not at the level that you would see on the larger ships, but it's on those ballpark, Frank. So you can see that this ship has a very powerful reactor. Now, the most important thing, and why I said this ship is kind of like the Defiant, is when you get to the shield index. All right, so we gotta remember this is a science ship exploring nebulas. It's doing other things. It's going to dangerous anomalies in space. Its shielding has got to be really strong to protect those scientists aboard those ships. You gotta remember, Federation scientists are not something that's disposable. Those are the greatest minds in Starfleet. Those are building our engines, our new weapons. We don't want to waste those people, and they're going to do everything they can to protect them. So obviously, you're sending a science ship into a dangerous area. You want it to be able to get out and survive. So standardization during Starfleet during this time has a lot to do with this ship, in my opinion, that it's using probably the same shield generator as these other larger ships, but because the shield bubble doesn't have to extend itself, it's just that much stronger. Now, we'll look at the exact amount here in just a second, but I just want you guys to think about that before you see it as an explanation. I think that because it's going into these dangerous areas in order to protect the crew, it has no offensive capabilities pretty much whatsoever except for 2 phaser turrets in the front, which is absolutely nothing. So the ship is not going to go fighting. It's only there to defend itself. That's the only reason it has the shields that it does. Now let's take a look at those shields. Standardization and protection for anomalies and things of nature in outer space of whatever they're exploring is my reasoning for why the shields are so powerful. Now go ahead and pause for a second, take a look at it, and breathe in it. The first category is the actual shield strength. So if you look at the Constitution, it's a 1, that's 390. So for every 1 point, you have 390 shield points. The middle section there for the Constitution, it says 9.21. That's actually the refreshment rate. So how fast the shields can regenerate themselves once you get attacked and things of nature. So you can see that the Constitution has a Starfleet standard level 1 shield, which is what you expect. 390 is what we see on screen. So but the Oberth, you look at that, it's the one, the actual Oberth is on the bottom, and so it's 3.57, refresh rate of 6.68, shields are 1,392,300. That is insane. Remember, the Galaxy class is 1,700,000 something. So this ship honestly has shields in the ballpark strength-wise as a Galaxy class starship. Now, there's other factors to take in mind. Like, I'm sure the Galaxy class shields are obviously able to reflect energy particles and things of nature at a greater scale, but just as a general eye purpose, like, this is insanely huge. Like, that's a badass shield generator. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea that they had this until I did the data, and then when I looked at my formula, I was like, what the hell is this? What ship is that? Like, what is this? And that was like the Oberth. I was like, this is stupid. How was that even possible? And I did not like it. And then I started realizing what the Oberth was, and then when I started looking at some of the other ships, then this started to make more sense. So I just give you guys a little secret. I didn't even put the Oberth in my original formulas because I didn't think it was worth paying attention to. So as you can see, Federation starships going from destroyers all the way down to light cruisers and heavy frigates and all these other things. The shielding around 1 is pretty standard, so 1.23, 1.25, things of that nature. You're definitely around that category, and it's going to fluctuate from obviously 390 to around 526. So that's like basically the max of Federation starships, okay, during that time period. These are all combat ships except for obviously the transport there at the bottom. But anyways, so this is this kind of an idea of what you're seeing, and then I'll show you the new formula. All right, guys, so yeah, there's a lot of data for all the ships on here, but so we're really only focusing about obviously the first section, the shields, the shield refreshment rate, and then obviously the third column there is the overall shield power based on our scaling. So yeah, so Dreadnought Excelsior, it's an Excelsior with 3 engines on it. Obviously it's a really big ship. 460,200, that's the shield power. And then you see these little Oberth with this insane, 1 million shields and crap. It's pretty weird. Okay, so when you look at the lore, so basically the general information for the Jester class, which is a light corvette, is they wanted to bring a ship that was light, cheap, and was able to bring photon torpedo pods to a battlefield. So this ship can obviously, stay in a fight for a long time. It's delivering photon torpedoes. It is underpowered for, a combat-oriented ship, but it's so small that all that energy is going to the shields. And so one of the things that's kind of weird about this design is when you really look at it, it looks like to me that the reactor, right, the warp core, is actually embedded in the photon torpedo. So we really don't see the warp core. We don't know where it is. Now, there are variants of this that don't have this additional module, so most likely the warp core is in the main body, but there is this bubble-looking section on the bottom where the warp core would be embedded where the photon torpedo launcher is, which seems insane to me, but if you wanted to get power directly there as fast as possible, because obviously that's where all your offensive capabilities are coming from, I could see that being an option, because let's be honest about this ship. If your shields go down, does it really matter if you get hit where the torpedo launcher is, or if you get hit, on the main bridge? It's not going to make a difference. This ship has very little armor. It's one torpedo, it's dead. We've seen that in the movie. So we know that if its shields go down, it's going to die, and it doesn't really matter. It can't take a hit whatsoever. So I don't know if it is or isn't. It's just something that I think I should point out, because we know for a fact the other designs don't have the warp core in the weapon systems. So if you're concerned about cost efficiency, which is something that was really important to the Federation during this time period because they had lots of enemies, you always have your colony ships that are not very, your colonies that are not very well defended. You don't have enough ships. So the Oberth is a very cost-effective way of bringing photon torpedo technology to the region, because the ship's shields are so large that they could survive photon torpedo barrages from other ships, and they can deliver their photon torpedo barrage and survive that encounter of back and forth, because their shielding is so powerful and so overwhelming. There's really nothing these ships are going to be able to do against these ships, especially if there's a couple of them. So they're pretty cheap, and they're extremely overpowered for ships of their size, and it's going to be very unexpected to your enemy, because you're expecting to be able to take this ship out in a full couple barrages, but that's not the case. And so by the time that your shields have collapsed, they're still operational, and they're still, firing their single shot torpedo tubes at you, and they're just going to whittle you down. So these ships are going to be really, really good at, adding fire support to your fleet. Now, logistically, they're very slow, and that's not good, and they're going to really slow down your fleet. They're an entire warp spectrum below, so they're better for defense than they would be for offense, in my opinion, because of them being so slow. And with the next design, which is the Orca, they decided to fix that problem. All right, so there is a 3-engine variant of the ship referred to as the Orca. It has Type 7 dual emitter, and it has 2 megaphasers. Now, the design and lure behind this ship is they wanted a mobile weapons platform. So this ship isn't going to be super effective when it comes to long-range torpedo barrages, because it has no torpedo launcher. It has to get to the target, and then once it gets to the target, it's able to use those megaphasers. Megaphasers are like 7 times stronger than standard Type 7 phaser emitters, and Type 7 phaser emitters are equivalent to Klingon disruptor cannons. Disruptor cannons are a higher yield weapon with lower outputs, so the volume is shorter, but overall they're the same. So keep that in mind. So that's going to deliver a really, really, really large payload. So what could happen is birds of prey, whatever ship enters the system, attacks them with torpedoes. These ships are going to be able to hold off because of the shielding that damage. They're very fast. They're just as fast as any regular ship because that third nacelle. And as far as warp capabilities, these ships can actually stay with the fleet. Now, they're not really going to do that. They really want them to be offensively because they don't have a whole lot of dilithium. You know, they have to be resupplied constantly because obviously they're so small and they don't have really a large fuel supply. But when you're defending a sector, you don't have to worry about that. They're fantastic. You torpedo them, they're going to run, get in your face, and then they're just going to blow the crap out of you. So, like I said, a ship decloaks, launches a torpedo, hits you. You can then get in there, start attacking with the mega phasers, and you'll start seeing that ships are going to struggle with these little tiny ships. They're like little Defiants. You know, their shields are 1,817,400. Klingons disruptors are around 56,250. Full barrage can fire 15 times. So what does that look like? So you're literally going to need to get a barrage off something like 32 times. So you want to bring down the shields of one of these ships. It's going to take you 32 barrages to do it. You're going to be dead before you ever get a chance to knock down the shields of one of these guys. Now, the mega phasers are 14,560 based on their scale from the manual. They can shoot 15 times. So they're hitting you for 218,400. So 2 barrages of mega phaser blasts is enough to destroy a Klingon bird of prey, straight out. So these ships are overwhelmingly powerful in a combat scenario, especially if they're defending. They're phenomenal. And I want people to understand that, yes, this is a starship, but it was built as a mobile weapons platform. So this ship has got the speed, it's got firepower, it's got just about everything that Oberth has and more. Now, obviously in the middle is the Orca, and then on the bottom, I believe, is the Oberth. So you can see that on the right is a Federation Constitution class starship. It's the Enterprise A. It's the Rift class. You can see that, yes, it's got superior regeneration, but its shielding is a fourth of what the ship is, and mostly due to the size. Now when you look at the ratio to the numbers built compared to other ships, so usually 30, 40 of a variant is built. There are about 100 of these ships. So the Oberth, the Orca, all these guys, about 100 of these. So you have a significantly higher amount of these little ships built in order to defend sectors and stuff. And when you look at historically how many of them were destroyed, it was only like 3 or 4. So these guys have actually been able to survive out there and taken very little damage, which is very impressive. All right, so why is the ratio so high for me? These ships being built, obviously their size, they're very, very teeny. Now, I'm being honest with you guys. Now, for a ship of its size, its cost ratio for the variant we just talked about is 23.6. A Constitution class is one of the most expensive ships out there to construct by the Federation chart. And I'll just tell you, it's going by the weapons that are aboard, it's going by the warp nacelles, and it's going by the shield, and then the shield ratio is the factors that these things are looking at, and they're adding them to one component cost, right? So overall, not counting the actual superstructure, just the parts alone, 23.6 obviously for our mobile platform here, and then 52.21. So it's almost half the cost of a Constitution class. Now, when you think about that, you're not getting a whole lot of a ship that can do a whole lot of anything for that price point. Now, when it comes to defense, this is fantastic. You can build 2 of these guys for the price of one Constitution, and honestly, you're getting pretty similar offensive capabilities. But the other 2 ships are much cheaper. They're around 16 and 19 points. They're much more budgetarily friendly. But when you want defense, this is the best way to go. Now, obviously, when you take into consideration some of these things, is these ships can't do anything else. They can't really move supplies. They can't go exploring. Their sensors are subpar compared to, most Federation starships. So it's not going to do any exploration. It doesn't have enhanced sensors like the Oberth class does. They can literally do nothing but guard the little sector they're at. They have very little use besides that. So from a strategic point, they have less value than other starships, but from a defensive capabilities, these are really good because they're cheap. They're very good at offensive or defensive capabilities. All right, so just give you guys just a defensive understanding. So if you build one of these ships, you build an Oberth or you build the Oberth without the sensor pod, it's could probably be around 16 to your cost value, and its offensive capabilities is 5,600. All right, so when we take a look at the Jester is going to be a significant increase. It's going to be 135,600 for defensive capabilities. Most of that power is coming from those torpedoes. It's got 2 forward-facing torpedoes, 2 rear-facing full-ton torpedoes, 1 Type 7 dual emitter. So a lot of firepower from those torpedoes on a little ship. All right, so the most expensive ship here for the Oberth classes, its weapon power index is 38,100. So it's obviously lower than the Jester. Now, the thing about this, though, from a defensive capabilities, it's probably better because the Jester can only carry 60 torpedoes. And once those 60 torpedoes are gone, it basically has no weapons. You don't have to worry about that when you have the Orca. The Orca can stay in the fight the entire time because it's got the mega phasers. So you have a weapon that honestly is hitting around the same power output as torpedoes, but the best part is you don't have to replenish them. All right, so we got the different variants, and now we know about them. Let's kind of break them down and look at what we would be doing with them. So the Oberth has no attack whatsoever. Its defenses are really good. Its cost is 16.25, very, very cheap. Its speed is not very good. It's not at par with standard starships, so it's slow. Its sensors are good, and it can do the job of not as well as an Explorer, but it can do a decent enough job using its module. So you got a really, really cheap ship that once you find something really interesting, you can go there, you can have your scientists take a look at it, and you can know that they're pretty well protected with a ship with shields that powerful. If they do get attacked, typically they can get in and get out of there before anything really happens. All right, so a little more expensive is the Jester at 19.81. You get the same warp issue. It's a little bit faster. Shields are a little bit less, but you do have a lot of firepower. So you could come to a fight. You've got photon torpedoes. You got forward and rear torpedoes, and you have a Type 7 emitter. So once you fire your photon torpedoes, you're stuck with the emitter. Doesn't really do a whole lot, and you only have the one. Your firing arcs are not particularly that great. You can only fire forward and rear, and if your torpedo launcher is still reloading, you can't fire at all. Once you run out of your load of, 60 torpedoes, I think is what it was, then you're stuck with, the same offensive capabilities as Oberth, which is not good at all. Now, you could then go for the Orca. Now, for a ship of that size, that price point is pretty high. You're got standard warp speed, so you can stay with the fleet. You have enormous defensive capabilities right off the bat. Your offensive abilities are not at par with the Jester, but over a long time, prolonged fight, you're better off because the mega phasers, they're not going to run out. You can continuously use them. You don't have to resupply. The only bad things that are coming out of this is there are issues with the mega phasers. So first off, the mega phasers don't have the range of the photon torpedoes. So you're not going to be able to fight targets, or targets could stay out of your range, but your ship's fast enough that it really could counter that pretty quickly, but it is a negative. The other thing is, though, mega phasers do have a tendency to overload, and that's why they're always built away from the hull, and they can detach in case they do overload. And if they overload, then obviously you lose your mega phaser. That's a really big problem. You'll be stuck like the Oberth, and you have basically one Type 7 phaser array, or array emitter, and then you're not really doing much for the fight. Overall, the Orca is probably the better of the three choices, just because you don't have to constantly reload the full-time torpedo, and then at your short and medium range, you have the advantage. You've got the overwhelming shields, and you've got honestly really powerful weapons. Now, it is a negative for the price point, but I think it's worth it to be able to stay with the fleet and not have to make the entire fleet drop down an entire warp field. Like, that's not good. That's really bad, especially when you're in a combat situation. Every minute counts. That's a long time lost for your fleet to have to slow down just because you can't get there. That's not good. Okay, so like I said, these guys are the defiance of their time period. They have really powerful shields. Now, I didn't really go too much into the hull strength because it's basically non-existent. One torpedo and these dudes are dead. One full barrage from any of the phasers, Type 7, Type 8, mega phasers, disruptors, they're gone. Like, there's absolutely no. Their hull value is below 65,000 terawatts, which doesn't really convert, but 65 terawatts, 65 megatons, and a single torpedo, they're dead. Now, do you remember the episode where the Klingons were shocked that they were able to blow that Oberth ship up with one torpedo? I think the reason why that was so shocking to them is because they've obviously probably been in combat with Oberth, but we only know like 2 of them had died. So from the Klingon perspective, remember, a Klingon bird of prey is equivalently the same size, basically, almost, as this thing. And what did we see there? We know that Klingon bird of prey can take like 195 points of damage to the hull based on my stats, and this thing is 65. So I think that's why they were so shocked. But I just thought I'd throw that little bit of nugget out there.